الصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We begin in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. We thank Him and praise Him for allowing us to gather here once again on Friday evening. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant His peace and blessing upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family, his companions, and all those who follow the truth until the last days. Brothers, today, inshallah, as you know, the series we're running, Why Non-Muslim Turn to Islam. And inshallah, brothers, today's discussion, today's talk will be given by Brother Jamal Harwood. Inshallah, he'll be talking about why he embraced Islam, what attracted him to Islam, and his journey to Islam. Jamal, he embraced Islam about 25, 26 years ago. He's born in Canada. He was raised as a Christian, so inshallah he will talk about his journey to Islam and basically talk about some of the aspects that attracted him to Islam. So I'll pass
I don't like to say like journey, but I did like to travel when I was younger, so I'll talk a little bit about traveling, which I think is quite important for me. When I was around about 10 to 12, I was quite into Christianity, and I was going to school at the time, and there was like Bible classes, and I had a Bible, and I would sit at home and I'd read it, and I was quite interested in a lot of the stories and details of it. I think were very interesting for me. My family was Christian, but what you might call typical liberal Christian, which means that they weren't really strong practicing Christians. They didn't go to church, or very rarely would they go to church. My mother had some pretty bad experiences with Christianity, and she had some aunts who were really strict when she was young, and they didn't explain things to her, and forced her to do certain things, which put her off a lot. So she got some hang-ups about that. And my father, well, was never really heavily into it, but they weren't pro or anti. So when I would sit reading the Bible, for example, or go to Bible classes, they didn't have any problem at all. They weren't pro, they weren't anti. But the problem I really found with that is that they weren't really definitive. They didn't really have strong views. And they'd have strong views on other things, about what is right and what is wrong. They'd have strong views about school and university and these types of things. But belief matters they weren't really strong on, which some people think is refreshing. But when I think back about it, I think that this is a big weakness and it's a big problem. So that was me in my sort of 10, 11, 12 years old, studied it. But in the back of my mind, I had some questions and I had some doubts about this. I mean, the more I studied Christianity, I had some issues that I couldn't really resolve, like a lot of prophets mentioned in the Bible. There's a lot of talk about Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, but what's the difference between Isa and the others? Why was Jesus given such a prominent position in Christianity, and in relation to the others? This is they're saying son of this and son of that, astaghfirullah. They made these big mistakes, but they couldn't really explain it to me. And then the issue about Trinity, for example, Trinity. They say Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and that. And again, I wouldn't get any explanations about this. It's kind of like, that's the reality, that's the fact, you've got to take it. So it's just kind of thing like take it or leave it, which doesn't really appeal to you that much. You're a young guy and thinking, so. And then when you speak to religious people about it, they'd sometimes say, well, you have to have faith. You have to have belief. So the belief part of it was almost like, well, take it, this is what we're giving to you. Emotionally, you should take it. And I had two elder sisters who became very strong, devoted Christians, and one of them my eldest sister, she used to go to these evangelical stuff. And she went along, I remember one night, and she invited me along. And I must have been about, I don't know, 14, 15 at this stage. So I was kind of drifting away from Christianity, not in the sense that I'd kind of rejected it, but it just wasn't really appealing. There wasn't really anything that was holding me there, because I got into other things, music, sports, what you do in your early teens. There was a lot of stuff going on, so it just wasn't top of the list. And that's the reality amongst most youth I found in my age, was that it was not really the big thing. You're religious, you're not religious. Most people weren't religious. And in fact, we live in a society where religion is a bit of a no-no. It's a real negative term. In fact, there's much more negative written and said about religion than there's positive. And that's a part of the problem in a secular society. So the same for me in my youth. But it was never negative as we see today, and as negative as we see about Islam. Certainly not about Christianity. But as I say, my oldest sister invited me along to one of these evangelical things. And the church was fantastic. It was big. They turned the lights down. There was a big charismatic speaker up the front. And they had candle light all the way around the side, and had the soft music and everything. And basically the preacher was saying, take this and do that and everything else. And coming to the end of it, it's a very emotional talk he gave. I don't remember a lot of this. I mean, we're going back probably 35 years now. But I do remember very clearly, he said, and who wants to take Jesus into his heart? And this was like take Jesus into his heart. It was just a big emotional trip, So a lot of the people there, they stood up and they walked forward. I'm not sure if they've been walking forward every week or not, but the point is that a few people, they stand up and they walk forward and they kneel down and all this. And there's a massive, big emotional trip out of it. And obviously my sister had done that a few weeks beforehand, but it wasn't appealing to me. I was sitting there saying that this is just a bit of a sales hype. I'm not. There's something missing here. There's something not right. I shouldn't take my whole belief on the basis of some nice music, some candlelight, and the guy saying, take Jesus into your heart. I'm just saying that it just wasn't convincing. There was something missing. So I sat in my chair, and my sister was kind of disappointed, but I sat in my chair and I said, I'll talk to you about it later. And we talked about it later, and I still wasn't convinced. So after that, I did think more about religion, but because I had these questions in my mind, what I resolved to do was I said, I was kind of busy. I was busy with my studies. I was going to work towards going to university. I wanted to get a degree. I wanted to get a job. All of this type of stuff as a young person. So I kind of put to the back of my mind, I said, listen, at some point, I'm going to study this religious matter deeply and seriously. So I had that principle. I didn't want to do it just then. I'm not saying I was right or wrong by doing this, but that was my thinking, all right? And I was just sitting there saying that, okay, at some point I want to sort it out. There's so many religions out there, there's so many different beliefs, they can't all be right, and maybe they can't all be wrong. I mean, maybe they are all wrong, I don't know, but the point is I hadn't studied them all. I had some serious doubts about Christianity, so I said, well, I will study it at some point. And this is where I said, okay, I'm going to travel. Because I wanted to travel to some other countries, I wanted to see some other cultures, I wanted to see some other people, see what it's about. So I did go to university, I did study, I got a good job, and then in my early 20s, I had a chance, because I was leaving a job, and I was leaving a country, in fact. I was in Canada, and I'd finished work, and I was fed up, the weather was too cold, and I was, I said, I don't want to take this anymore. And I had a chance to move to London. So I bought a round the world airfare, and it had like about 6 stopovers on the way. And I had a year to do it. All right? So this is back in the days when it was a lot safer to travel. And I wouldn't recommend anyone now, because you really need to travel with people. But I was traveling on my own, and I was a young guy and whatever else, fitness and self-defense and whatever. But the point is, I thought, okay, so in my mind, I said, I'm going to go check out some of the religious matters. So I was going through Asia, and I remember making a point of going to some of these temples and whatever. I got to Kuala Lumpur, and great, checking up all the details. There's a main mosque in the center of Kuala Lumpur. Got on the train from the airport into Kuala Lumpur, went to the mosque and said, okay, I'm going to check out Islam and see what it's about. Went into this beautiful marble mosque. It's really nice if anyone's been to KL. And, you know, some things strike you in your mind, you know, and you think, you know, and this, we're talking 26, 27 years ago, you know, and sandals, right? You know, I went in this mosque, and I must have ended up in the ablution area. There was nobody there in the mosque. I was at 9 in the morning, so obviously I was after Fajr, and it was before Dhuhr, so there's nobody in the mosque. And I went walking around, and there's the ablution area, and there's all these sandals. You know, you see all these little sandals and what have you, you know. So that was my introduction to Islam. You know, I hadn't really studied it much prior to that, and I wanted to study and understand it more, but so my first thing was nobody there to explain anything, nobody to tell me what it's about, nobody to give me a book, nothing, you know. So, but it was, my timing was kind of sad. I went to a Buddhist temple, and amazing place. I mean, they had this Buddha. It must have been, I don't know, 80 meters long. It was incredible size. But it was lying down. You know, had this whole big temple. You think a temple thing's standing up or whatever. They had this Buddha lying down, massive big thing. It was, you know, the height of it was bigger than this room, and the length of it was, it's just amazing. But it's not, you know, I mean, if this Buddha was important, why wouldn't it even be standing up? I know they have some of them, they stand up and whatever, but this lying down Buddha and everything. So. And the same thing with the Hindu temples and talking to the people and whatever. So, you know, I started to read about these matters and on my travels, and I spoke to people and got different perspectives, you know, wherever I went through Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, you know, several places. I ended up in London and I met some Muslims when I was in London, and I started to talk a bit more about Islam, and was encouraged to go down to Regent's Park Mosque. So I went down to Regent's Park Mosque and started to read a book, Maudud's Towards Understanding Islam. I think it was the first book. Anyone read that? Heard of it?
What is it called?
Maududi. It's Towards Understanding Islam. It's probably the first book I read on Islam. I'm not saying it's the greatest book, but it wasn't bad. It was quite good. But talking to the Muslims and going to the mosque, the thing that really struck me about Islam was that the people were very willing and open to talk and explain things. So it's never like there's a taboo subject, never like there's anything, oh no, we don't talk about that. Nothing that sort of couldn't be explained. And all of these belief matters that I'd had questions about in Christianity, Islam explained them really well. You know, obviously all the prophets had the same message about the oneness of Allah, how that there was a God, and that they were prophets and messengers. They weren't son of and this and that and some sort of embellishment and all these sorts of things, which, as I studied more about Christianity later, you see Paul, you know, had put probably more influence than anyone else in Christianity in terms of really embellishing the message of Christianity to try and get converts, which is not the way to do it. The thing is to explain the facts of something and tell it to people, and it's for them to see the facts rather than to you try and make it more than what it is. So that was explained really, really clearly to me. The question, obviously, there's no Trinity in Islam. You know, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet, is a human being, he's human characteristics. You know, so you don't have all of this sort of trying to, you know, make it more than what it was, which is obviously the mistake that many of the followers of Isa alayhi salam did. But the key thing here is that, you know, you do have these questions, or I had these questions, which, okay, it took me a few years before I started to study them seriously, but you do have them. And that is, you know, why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going? You know, this is what they call the big question in life. So that is a big question. And every child at some stage is going to ask its parents this question. I mean, I just picked up my sister from the train station the other day, and she's got a couple of young kids. One of them's about 4 and a half, 5. very chatty, very talkative, you know, asking, you know, a dozen questions every 5 minutes, you know, on all sorts of things. And you can just imagine these are the sorts of things that she asked, is that, you know, who am I? What am I doing here? Now, whether it's a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, it is the big question in life, because it's like, you know, what is the purpose of life? You know, so you need to have some understanding of purpose of life. If you have no understanding of purpose of life, then you're just going to drift along. So I sometimes bring this analogy. It's a bit like, you know, if you get a job, you know, if you get a job, and the first day of the job, maybe you know the company, you know the address, obviously, you go along there, you may know the job title, but until you actually go in and sit in and do the job, you don't know what the job's about. So if you just go in and they say, I'll sit at that desk, and I'll come back and see you later, what are you going to do? You're going to sit at the desk, and you think, well, what's the job? You know, what do I do today? Do I do filing? Am I, you know, meeting customers? Am I doing this? You know, whatever you're doing. The point is, until you actually have a job description, until you have some detailed explanation about it, you're not going to be able to do that job. There's just no way. And life is a little bit like that, because, you know, we have a purpose, we have an objective, we are working towards something, and you do need some details, you need some instructions on what to do and how to do it. If you don't actually tackle this issue, you're just going to drift along, you know. So if you sat in that job and never bothered, and you know, that person that was going to explain to you in the next hour, they just kind of have a heart attack and they get taken away, and then you're sitting there and you never go speak to somebody else and say, well, what's my job, why I'm here, what am I doing, what happens next? You know, you're never going to be fulfilled in that job, because you're going to do nothing. And life can be very easily consumed like that, because there's a lot, you know, there's a lot of bright lights, there's the television, there's the radio, the internet, all that type of stuff. You know, so you can very easily get consumed by this without sort of taking a step back and saying, well, you know, what am I really here for? What am I trying to achieve? Now, we live in a secular age, and the answer to that question is very simple. You work hard, you make as much money as possible, and you enjoy yourself as much as possible with material enjoyment, sexual, physical, material, whatever, you know, it enjoy as much. It's called work hard, play hard type attitude. And in fact, it became so popular, a lot of job descriptions, you know, they say, you know, we have a work hard, play hard attitude in this company. I mean, you know, what's all that about? It means that they're going to work you like a slave and want you to work really hard, extra hours, and then afterwards they're going to go out and get drunk, and you forget about how hard you've been working, and then, you know, let your hair hang down and all that, whatever, because they want you to have some sort of camaraderie with the other slaves that are working in the business. It's not 9 to 5, it's kind of like 7 till 7 or 7 till 9. I mean, I worked in one job, and there was one of my colleagues, and they said that they had a nervous breakdown. I said, oh, what happened? And they said they worked for Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs is one of the biggest investment banks in the world, and they got this work hard, play hard attitude. And basically, this person, you know, went through 26 interviews to get the job, so then it's so important, and was working literally 14, 16, 17, 18-hour day jobs, had a complete mental breakdown, was taken off to the hospital, was all wired up and everything, and the boss came in and said, oh, how are you, and this and that, and they said, oh, this and that, you know, they said, okay, you know that file you work on, where was it, and what are you doing, all this kind of stuff. I'm not joking, and it was literally, so anyway, they ended up leaving that job, but there's a lot of jobs out there like that, and it's basically, you know, they get really highly paid, and they get big bonuses and all that type of stuff, but they don't have any life. It's just, you know, they work 6-7 days a week, and they're working all this stuff, and they've got no idea, no time to sit and think. It's just flat out make money, go to the pub, go to the gym, you know, whatever. Well, the whole day is regimented. You grab a few hours of sleep, you know, a few takeaways here and there. So it's just it's really a miserable life when you think about it. A really very miserable life. Anyway, so this key, and I'll get back to this key question before I run out of time here. Is that you need to sort of tackle this issue about who you are and why you're here and so on. And the thing that really appealed for me with Islam is that it it turned this question around. You know, the Christian view was kind of like, you need to have faith. You come to a certain point, if you've got questions, just have faith. You know, go down, kneel down in front of the candles, listen to the soft music, take Jesus into your heart, you know, have the faith, just take it. You know, it didn't have to have any convincing argument, nothing to grab it. You had to just take faith. Islam turned it round the other way. It actually said, use your intellect. Now, in Arabic, intellect is aql. And the word aql, aqalun, taqalun, use your intellect, appears 52 times in the Quran. So, for example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 76, it says, will you not use your intellect? And another verse, one of my favorite verses, they were asking the Prophet ﷺ for proof of the existence of God. And in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 164, it says, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Inna fi khalqi samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafi layli wan nahara. It says, behold, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, in the alternation of the day and night. It's a very long verse. Let me just give it the main points as an English translation. It says, behold, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the day and the night, and the sailing of ships through ocean for profit of mankind, and the rain which Allah sends down from the skies, and the life which He gives to an earth that is dead, in the beasts of all kinds that He scatters through the earth, and the changing of the winds and the clouds, which say trail like slaves between the sky and the earth. Here indeed are signs for a people who are wise, who use their intellect, yaqalun. So all of these things are saying, just basically observe life. You say, what do you see in this planet? You see the wind and the rain and the clouds and the day and the night and the order and the structure and the detail and the animals and hundreds and millions of different beasts and organisms, and it's just quite incredible. I mean, I quite like some of these nature programs. Anyone see the Frozen Planet program? Yeah. It's quite an interesting show. You can probably get it on the internet. But one thing struck me. They had this caterpillar, frozen caterpillar. 14 years. This caterpillar crawls under a rock in the Arctic, and it just freezes, and it actually freezes solid with everything else. And then in the spring and the summer, it kind of thaws off, comes out, gathers a little bit more sustenance, and then does that, and then crawls back under the rock and freezes solid again. I mean, it's incredible. 14 years it is coming out and then eating something and then going back and freezing solid. It's amazing. And then after 14 years, it turns into, you know, a butterfly, and away it goes. You know, and it's an amazing thing that this thing could happen like that. And you think any type of organism, whether it's the bottom of the ocean or in the heights of the Himalayas. There's a TV program the other night about birds flying over the Himalayas, and then these ducks flying 5 miles up, and you just think about the diversity of life and say, is there any way that any of these things can come about through chance? I mean, they are so detailed, so complex, it's just an impossibility that any of these things can just come about through some random chemical reactions. This is what some evolutionists say. Now, we don't deny that there can be evolution. There's evolution within the species, meaning that we become bigger or stronger, or if we live in a hot climate, we become darker skinned. Or, this is an evolution within a species. And there is some evolution within a species, but not between species. There's what they call, there's a missing link, meaning there's no linkage between the species. So the idea that it all came from something, some chemical soup, and then it started evolving over many millions of years ago is fanciful. So Allah is directing us to think about this environment, to look at it. And if you look at it, you'll see certain facts. You'll see that it's weak, it's needy, it's dependent, it's not independent. There's nothing on this planet that is independent. Everything depends upon something else. Everything in this life has something else that it must do, the food chain that it's part of, the life, the photosynthesis, the water that it needs to survive, the shelter that it needs to survive. If you look at these interrelationships between all of these things, you can say that there's just no way that any of these things, the human being is supposed to be the height in terms of the intelligence and everything else that the human being has. There's still, human being cannot do it on his own. Human being has got a survival instinct. It means that if you don't have food, shelter, clothing, you're going to die. So you are dependent as well. And all of these animals and plants are also very dependent. So they have limits, they have structure, they have a starting point, they have an ending point. And when you ponder upon that, you see that that cannot come about by itself. Something had to put them there. Something had to put those dependencies. Something had to put the support for those things. Something had to put this alternation between day and night, so that we could have wind and rain and clouds and the water and the rain. And something had to put this planet a certain distance from the sun, otherwise it wouldn't function. You just look at the other planets like the Mars or Venus. You know, they're too hot to support this type of life that we have. So there's incredible laws of these universe which are actually designed and structured, because if they're off by even 1%, it doesn't happen. The planet wouldn't exist, and it wouldn't rotate around the sun at the distance that it does, and we wouldn't be here. So that designer, that creator, we can't visualize it, but there is a designer, a creator, and that we call Allah. We call the God of the universe and the worlds. And he is giving us some instruction, giving us some meaning to this by saying, think, ponder, look upon this life, look at its diversity, look at its complexity, look upon its dependence. Is there anything there that is independent, can function on its own? Nothing. It's all been there, it's all been designed, it's all been structured, it's all been put there. Nothing that we can see in this universe goes outside of those rules, which means that the core rule is that something independent of that, something beyond that, has created it. So when we come back to the question of the child, where did we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? We can say, right, there's a creator which has put us here. A creator has put this planet. A creator has put this life. We're part of that. Then we come to the question of why. So why did Allah put us here? And this is sort of the key thing. So we get back to this job description. We're sitting at the table, at the desk. We need to have an idea. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. It says Allah said, Allah did not create the man and the jinn إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, except as a worship unto him. And worship in this context means the widest possible word, which means conformity to the rules and laws and prohibitions and injunctions and everything else that Allah has given us. So there's some purpose there. So He did not create us except to follow His rules and guidance. So then we can see some sort of purpose. In the same way that you join the company and the company says do this and the lunch hour is such and such a time and we want you from 9 till 5 or 7 till midnight if it's Goldman Sachs or what, So the point is that you've got a regimen, you've got some instruction, you've got something to deal with here, which gives you some sort of understanding. And the more you get into this, the more detail, you can see that it's not just a question of, eating the halal and avoiding the haram foods, and not just praying and fasting, but you've got a social responsibility, you've got a political responsibility, you've got an economic responsibility, you've got to pay your zakat, you've got to carry Islam to other people, you've got to try and deal with poverty, you've got to deal with homelessness, you've got to deal with wars which are functioning when people are attacking other people in the third world or attacking other Muslim countries. You've got to deal with all of these things. These are our responsibilities. Illa liya'budun. This is part of the worship that we have. It's not something we can ignore and say, no, I'm not really into that. That's not my bag. No, Allah has given us some purpose in all of these matters. It may be a big job. It may be something that is going to take many years to deal with, but so what? That's life. That's the purpose here. So we need to get into it, understand it, and commit ourselves to it. And again, this is the key thing, because the third point of that question is, where did we come from? We came from Allah. Allah created us. Why are we here? We're here to follow the rules and laws and guidance and instruction and life according to our Creator. And then where do we go next? Okay, after this life, we will be resurrected. We will be accounted. And we will be rewarded, we'll be punished according to our belief and our actions. So we need to have the right belief, and we need to fulfill the right actions and avoid the forbidden ones. So that completes the picture. So if you look at that, it does give us some purpose, because you need this third element, because what are you working towards? Something that you have an objective towards. It's not just, I want to get good marks, I want to go to university, I want to get a good job, I want to... there's something of actually much greater importance, which is that after this life, whether I live for another day or another year or another 30 years, it doesn't matter, but at the end of my life, I've got something that I've worked towards. This is very important, and that's actually what you get real satisfaction from. The person in the job that gets job satisfaction, so to speak, at the end of the day, they've completed their accounts, or they've completed the stacking the shelves with the goods that they were doing, or they've sold X amount of products or whatever. All of that type of stuff, we get some job satisfaction, some sort of, feeling of doing something well. The same thing Islam provides. It says is that, okay, you get, you prayed on time, you fasted today, you've given some dawah, you've spoken to somebody, you've done this, you've read some text, you've written something, you've gone out, you're doing something towards a wider objective. And this is important because it gives you some real purpose in life. And again, I found these other religions very passive. It was just like, join the club. Join some sort of paradise club. Take the emotion, take the feeling. And if you're a good person, which is not even defined very well, and if you've got your right belief, which is not really solid, it's just emotional belief, and emotional belief can come and go. It's just as easy as that emotion can be turned off, it can quite easily be turned off. Whereas Islam said, use your intellect. As I say, turn this thing upside down. So the belief was not something you just take. In fact, in Islam, it attacked those who just followed the belief of their forefathers. He just followed the belief of his forefathers. So you've got to be solid. It's not this question that, my father gave me this, so I take it. Take it blindly. I went down to the mosque and my parents took me to the mosque, so I just take it. No, you don't just take it blindly. It says you think, you ponder, you function according to what Islam has given you. And, and that way your belief will be strong. So when people challenge your belief, when they question your belief, you've got a basis. It doesn't mean you have all the answers, but you've got a basis to go back and study the answers. You can get the answers to the questions. Some people say, well, why did, my mother... ardent disbeliever, she says, well, why did God create all of these? We're like ants. We're just like ants. We don't have the, but look, the ants have got a great purpose. They achieve incredible things if you look what ants do. Now, you may want to belittle the ant, but the ant, when you look at their colonies, you look at what they build, and they're incredible things. Now, do they get job satisfaction and all this? Is not my question, all right? But the point is that you look at that, they've got some purpose. What did humans achieve? When we lived according to Islam, and Islam was applied for hundreds of years, we had a real solid society. We had a lot of people that could think and meditate, and they developed the medicine, they developed the sciences, they developed the arts, they developed incredible things when Islam was being applied, because people didn't just run around trying to make money for other people, the Goldman Sachses of this world. So they had a bit of time to think and to ponder and to do things. It was not just like money, 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 So we did achieve some great things in our history, and inshallah we'll achieve some great things again in the future. But we want to be part of that. So to be part of that, it's just, to us, it's just a question of conviction. It's just a question of, are we solid in our belief? And the nice thing about Islam is that it gives us this foundation, and from that foundation, then we can build and move forward. So I just wanted to end with a couple of points, and that is that obviously since I became Muslim, I felt much more solid in terms of my belief. And there's an expression that I think it was Voltaire. He said, "What people want is certainty." So this is actually what you need in life, is actually some bedrock certainty. Because if you have certainty in any issue, then it provides a real solid foundation for what's going on. So if you have certainty over this question of belief, well then you will be solid in terms of your actions. So Islam says, get up at Fajr time and pray, even if you're tired. Okay, you know that it's important, so you will get up and you will pray. It's not a question of, well, why do we pray? Is it this? Is it good exercise? Is it this and that? Da, da, da. No, you don't go into these rationality things. And this is, as I say, this equation turned around, is that your belief needs to be very solid, and you use your intellect, you use your ability to reason and rationalize to come to the foundation. Does God exist? Is the Quran the word of Allah? What did the Quran tell us to do? Rationally, we're convinced of these matters. So what the Quran tells us to do, like, prayers are enjoined upon the believers at stated times, means that, okay, the Quran tells us definitively to pray. And the Prophet ﷺ said, pray as you see me praying. So he told us to pray at Fajr time at a certain time and whatever. So that's our indication. Kun fayakun. What we see, we hear, we obey. We take that. Whereas the Christian is the other way around, or many of the people who don't have belief are the other way around. Their belief is all over the shop. They never really think about it. It's just, And then they rationalize all the time about the rules and laws and what to do, what not to do, and forever tie themselves up in knots. Whereas Islam says, do it, in terms of what we need to do. There's these rules and laws. You may understand them, you may not understand them. By all means, study them, but at the end of the day, you do need to do them. If somebody brings a rational explanation why they think pork is good for you, good luck to them. They can bring a rational explanation. The Quran has categorically forbidden us from eating pork. So we don't eat it. Somebody can bring some medical evidence. They think that if they cook it 5 times and then microwave it and do this and that. No, it doesn't count. The point is that the Quran said don't do it. So whatever reason, we don't do it. So we don't try and rationalize and say, well, this is times, we're in modern days now, so we're going to eat the pork and we do that. No, we don't do that. So the point is that we take those things solidly and sincerely. But the belief, you've got to think about, you've got to be solid on, because if you don't have a solid belief, if you're not clear on that, then all of these other things are going to be of no value, and all of the rules and laws. Last point I said is that I started, there's certain scholars like Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani who's written some really good books talking about belief. And there's one that is called The System of Islam. And when I read that book, there's a very nice, at the beginning chapter, it's called The Road to Faith. And it talked about some of the things I've talked about now earlier. But I took this and I kind of rewrote that chapter. I quite accept this as copying. This is not original thoughts. So I took this and I wrote this booklet called Faith in Progress. So I took from the writings of this scholar Nabhani, and I rewrote this and put lots of examples into it to try and make it easier to understand. So it's not my work, it's me taking from this scholar Nabhani. And I wrote this thing called Faith in Progress, only about 20, 30 pages. It's available on the internet. If you just do a search for Jamal Harwood, Faith in Progress, you'll find a PDF out there. Anyway, it's been copied all over the net, and there's many copies out there, and you can find it. I found it can be useful to give to non-Muslims if you want to explain the foundations of the belief, and explain a little bit more about why I found Islam to be, such a compelling way of life. So maybe you can go out and look it up, and inshallah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to deal with them now.
Jamal, inshallah, brothers, we have about 20 minutes for question and answers. So can you raise your hands? Muhammad.
Where did you take the Shahada?
Regent's Park Mosque.
Yeah. Was there any brother who lived or was there any brother really where you slept for one time?
Yeah, there was 2 or 3 brothers there. As I say, they have a circle every Saturday, 3 p.m. Downstairs, and it's really there for non-Muslims, and they have a speaker each week talking about different issues, and and they're very helpful. Yeah.
Like your parents, particularly your mother, they're actually quite representative of a lot of non-Muslims you see today. Like, they're okay with religion, but they themselves, personally, don't like it, or not understand it. My workplace, it is quite a popular viewpoint. I was speaking to one of my colleagues about Islam, and we came up with a discussion of proof of God, and he said, look, why do you religions? You always try to prove it. You're a faith, so why don't you just be a faith? Why do we have to have proof and stuff? And I just found that as a quite popular thing that a lot of non-Muslims had. So I was just wondering, did your parents ever change their view on Islam, or if they did, how did you change their minds?
They have it to an extent. I always remember, this is back in the days when they didn't have internet, right? Or internet was just something just about to start. So I wrote a letter to my parents, and I told them that I was thinking about embracing Islam. And I remember my dad, who was in Canada at the time, he wrote back, and he said, with Islam, with its emphasis on the family and community, he said, it's good. He said, go for it. So I thought that was quite open-minded. It wasn't for him, meaning that, unfortunately, my dad's kind of stood back from all of this, because there is an attitude amongst many non-Muslims that say, well, is it for me, is it not for me? They don't look at it, this question, in the sense of saying, is that, okay, there's a reality here, I exist. What's the meaning of my existence? Why am I here? And why did God put me on earth, and what does that mean? All right? It's not just an academic exercise that says, oh, it's interesting, there must be a God, and God put us here, and blah, blah, blah. No, there is actually some purpose and detail, because when you read the Quran, it explains, your responsibility as a father, your responsibility as a brother, your responsibility, to the community, your responsibility to mankind, to all of these things. It explains and tells you about this. Politics, economics, social system, you name it. It goes into all of these details. So the issue of saying that it's just a personal matter is a big, big mistake. Because the people out there saying, oh, yeah, this Islam is interesting, and da-da-da-da, and they just never took it in terms of saying that it's actually a responsibility to know this. They're gonna take the consequences on the Day of Judgment. And unfortunately, many people have that. So you do need to sort of coax them a little bit in terms of saying is that, well, does God exist? And go through these arguments. And a lot of people, they say people in this country, 65, 70% of people believe in God. Okay, that's fine. But then you look beyond that and you say, well, did that mean anything to them other than they go to the church at Christmas or Easter or whatever? No, to most of them then, it's just like, okay, if you really push me, they'll say, yeah, we think there's a God. But it didn't go any further than that. Obviously, the Muslims is different, because the Muslims have a clear understanding of the Day of Judgment, they have a clear understanding ability of accountability, Dawah, all of these matters. So that's important. But unfortunately for my father, my mother's quite negative about religions generally, but they've taken a different perspective, because I do write quite a lot, so they read some of my writings, and they've got a fairer understanding of Islam than most of the people out there. But unfortunately, they're not into belief, meaning they want us to take a step back on the belief thing. They've got this problem which says that religion's a personal matter, take it or leave it. So they don't want to see where they fit in. They don't want to fit in, even though they do fit in, as every human being does. You either accept the job description or you don't. If you don't accept the job description, well then you've got a problem. They don't see it now, but they will see it in the Day of Judgment.
So just to add to that, that's kind of like the viewpoint a lot of people have at work. One of the things I try to be very open about my Islam and what I do, what I don't do. It's all in the hope of it'll prompt questions maybe and prompt a discussion. But at the end of the day, when they see what I do, they just label it as culture, or it's just a cultural thing, and they don't actually see their role in it, which is always a problem. So they never really ask the question, what is my purpose in life, or why do you do things you do? Why do you choose to do things you do? It's just okay, that's just your culture, and we respect that, and that's always probably the biggest barrier to Dawah is no, they don't see it as what is your okay. I understand that I have a purpose in life. Don't you think about yours? It's kind of the question you want them to think about, but you just like you said, it's something they take a step back from it, and it never comes across their mind.
Yeah. As I said, there's a lot of negative about religion. It's just so negative in general. Not even Islam. Obviously, Islam's got a whole new crowd of things here. I mean, public enemy number one in this country. You see, the amount of media coverage there is to Islam and Muslims compared to the amount of population. You know, I read some numbers the other day, were really shocking. They said that if it told you how many terrorist acts there were in the last 5-6 years in Europe, any ideas? Guess? 5? 2? Anyone else? Wild guess? 2010 in Europe. Terrorist acts in the last 5-6 years. How many of those were done by Muslims, do you think?
Well,
what percentage?
that was a trick question. You said terrorist attacks, you always think about Muslims.
They got you as well, eh?
Well, it's 0.04% or something. I mean, and this is, most of them it's the separatist movements, it's this movement, it's that movement, So you would think that terrorism means, complete association with Islam. I mean, this is the thing. This is the way the media holds it. But the reality is that it's a tiny, tiny element related to some elements within the Muslim population. Tiny, tiny thing. Not compared to the Muslim population as a whole, I might say, but even compared to the whole of the population, because 0.04% related to Islam means that all these other movements is what the terrorist problem is. It's not Islam, but you don't get that in the media. You don't get that by the politicians. We must do something about Islam. We must do something about extremism. We must, it's a direct attack on Islam. So anyway, amongst all this fog and hate and attack against Islam, there are a lot of people out there that want to understand. So don't be surprised that after 9/11, the biggest book seller in the US for a long period of time was the Quran, because a lot of people say, what's all this about? They say, when George Bush comes out, he says, you're either with me or with a terrorist. A lot of people said, gee, I'm certainly not with George Bush, so I better check out what these people are doing. So they're going to start reading all this type of stuff, and so there's an opportunity there for the Muslims to get a message out, and there's a lot of skepticism because people don't trust the politicians, they don't trust the media, so we do have a little bit of a window there. But amongst all of that, the whole language, the whole sentiment, really negative, so we've got to try and work against that.
Is it Jamal?
Yeah.
Jamal, what's your birth name?
It's John.
John, okay.
Yeah.
My name's Oliver. So.
I still use it. I mean, the point is, you don't have to. You don't have to change your name. In some senses, I still have it. So, I mean, my parents refer to me as that. So, I don't have any problem with that. So.
What was the name? What was that PDF called again?
Faith and Progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Faith and Progress. And then if you just Google that, / Jamal Harwood, Harwood, you'll find a PDF of it pretty easy. It's just 20-odd pages of, as I say, me taking these really strong ideas from this scholar called Taqiyuddin Nabhani and adding a few examples to it. So
if I put in Jamal something?
Yeah, if you type in Jamal Harwood and then type in...
I can email it to you, inshallah.
Oh,
yeah, Faith and Progress.
The reason I ask is because I have a couple of friends who are atheists.
Yeah.
And when I've known these guys for many years.
Yeah.
And they're very close friends of mine.
Yeah.
And they ask me a lot of questions about Islam.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when they ask, say, 10 questions, and I give them just a clear, shortcut answer, then he asks another 10 questions, and then it goes on and on and on, and then they get overwhelmed by it. So I'd like to give them something that kind of, just has things nice and neat.
Yeah, I mean, this booklet deals with belief in God, belief in the Quran, and belief in messengers. That's the three main points, and it's just giving some arguments about that. So, step by step, you can't really jump into sort of the issue about, why do we pray? Unless you deal with this question about, is there a God? And then did God ask us to pray? You see. So you've got to take it this way. We have what we call belief matters in Islam, the foundation, aqidah, creedal matters. Oneness of God, the Quran, the prophets, Muhammad as a prophet, all of these main basics. those issues have to be definitive. They have to be decisive. Islam says the Aqidah is decisive, meaning that you need the decisiveness. Otherwise, any of the rules wouldn't have any meaning to you, unfortunately. So those need to be decisive. Now, some of those other rules, there is room for debate, especially when you start looking at some political rules. There's debate over them, meaning there's different opinions. But the creed is decisive. So there's decisive arguments about the creed as well, which is nice. There's very decisive matters. So your friends should look at it from the point of view and say, well, this is a challenge, and let them, take up the challenge.
Yeah, and the one guy in particular, he's from Tobago, and his mother's a practicing Christian, very strong believer. And what I find is interesting is, I was born into a Christian family, but at a very young age, in my early teens, I decided, I stopped believing in Christianity as a religion, and then I married a Chinese Buddhist when I was 25, but I was a Buddhist for about 10 years. So for me, the transition from Buddhism into Islam is very natural because of their lifestyle, the way of life, and their ideology. But Islam, like you were saying, coming from Christianity to Islam does make sense because there are lots of loopholes in Christianity and in the Bible. And such questions like, why are there so many different versions of the Bible? It's a bit like, I guess, buying a motor car. If say 10 people have a motor car, say like a Toyota, right? And there's a user's manual for that car. Now, if there are 10 different user's manuals, then which user manual do you follow? Everyone has their own interpretation. So it makes sense to have one user's manual, right? So then everybody knows how to use that car. So this is what I was trying to explain to my atheist friends and friends who are, who are still Buddhists, because then they kind of question, what they're reading. My friend who's a practicing Christian, she's a evangelical Christian, and I was born into Christianity that was Church of England, slight differences, and then there were things that he talked about that his mother does, and then there are things that I did which were slightly different, and even I questioned the authenticity of that school of thought, that version of Christianity. And then he started thinking, that's interesting. But yeah, I really appreciate that because that'll help him.
Keep in touch with Mufas. If you've got any questions, if you want me to meet any of your friends, I'd be happy to meet. We could go for a coffee someday or something. If any of them want to discuss more, I'd be happy to. I live in this sort of area, so if anyone wants to, discuss more. Yeah, quite close to here. Yeah, so.
Oh right, okay. I probably live around the corner.
Yeah, so if any of your friends want to discuss, I'm happy to meet them.
Mine's more of a comment rather than a question. I think, one of the things I think we've got to learn from these types of circles is one of responsibility and opportunity. And they have this old English saying that you never know, never go by an open door. And any opportunity comes along, we should take it. And it reminds me of my mother-in-law. She met some sister online, not a sister, a non-Muslim lady in Brazil, a grandmother who had no interest but believed in God. And just through some women's forums, God knows what it was about, knitting or something like that, they started to discuss. And they found they had one thing in common, and that was a love of God, a shared love of God. And obviously, anyone from South America, they've got a very similar passion towards God that we as Muslims have, this reverence of God. So my mother-in-law started to discuss with her, and to cut over a period of 3-4 years short, alhamdulillah, the grandmother, she embraced Islam, her husband embraced Islam, her children embraced Islam, and the grandchildren embraced Islam. They all emigrated to Syria for 2 years to learn Arabic. They've gone back to Brazil, and alhamdulillah, they take a lot of the literature off our websites and our books and stuff, and the grandmother translates it into Portuguese, and she distributes it amongst a lot of the community over there. And alhamdulillah, the general story we get is, alhamdulillah, someone else is embracing Islam. And it says the Dawah here is so easy because people love God. So when you approach someone and you talk about God and you talk about the oneness of God and what our view towards God is, and having this religious instinct but satisfied in the correct way, saying, alhamdulillah, people are embracing Islam more than you could even count. So here's just a small example of my mother-in-law who, for all intents and purposes, maybe isn't as knowledgeable as a lot of the scholars and the imams in the mosque, but alhamdulillah, with what little knowledge she had, through the wonders of modern age and modern technology, alhamdulillah was able to interact with someone and speak to someone, and through their guidance and through Allah opening her heart, they embraced Islam. And are now in a continent, spreading this message of Islam to, thousands of people. If you actually look at a lot of the statistics, they're saying that, Islam is on the rise in places like Brazil and Argentina because people love God. Even look in America, they said that one of the largest percentage of rises of converts in America are young Latino women, because of the lifestyle. They're getting fed up with a lot of the things that they see around them. So my point comes back to us here. Sometimes we get this idea, spreading Islam, it's not my responsibility, we leave it to someone else. Someone with a little bit more knowledge, someone who's got maybe a beard, or is imam of a mosque, knows how to speak Arabic, let them do it. And my example here is of, something I always remind myself is of my own mother-in-law. Just from an example from someone she met online, managed to discuss with her, all through emails, just through emailing each other, sending each other ideas and books and stuff like that. Alhamdulillah, look what happened. She embraced Islam and are now carrying a dawah in a new continent. So we've got to understand we have a responsibility towards this ourselves. We have a responsibility in our own personalities and with the people that we meet at work, at school, college, wherever they may be. We've got this responsibility to deliver this message. And on the day of judgment, there's many hadith that talk about, your friends and your colleagues who turn around and then say to Allah, oh Allah, you had your slave, you had your ibad. He was a Muslim, and why did you never tell me about Islam? So it's something we should, remember, we should reflect upon and, understand what our responsibility is, inshallah.
Inshallah, we'll take the last question.
Talking about the responsibilities, you mentioned in your presentation about how in Islam there are responsibilities, and it's not just a spiritual responsibility or a belief. There is also, you mentioned something like economical, political, social, all of these things. Living in this world now, in this era, you see that there is nothing of what you're talking about out there, other than the mosques, the spiritual side of Islam. You pray, you make sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's Islam. You manage to get some halal meat sometimes, you convince your wife and kids to wear hijab, and that's all what you see from Islam now. So can you explain a bit more about what you meant?
As I say, because we live in this secular society, that way of life, that secular way of life, is the dominant way of life, and it makes it very difficult in this country. But even in our countries, we've got countries where it's 99% Muslim, but the society is not Islamic, which means that those are societies which were subjugated, they were colonially occupied, and the colonialists put their structures in the place there, they put their rulers and governments and everything else. And even when we kicked some of those governments out, they then put dictators. So we had, post-colonial dictators, and now we're beginning to kick out some of those dictators. So the next wave is to bring other people, Muslims, but, compromised, meaning that they're not prepared to implement Islam. So we have this problem. But it is a job that Muslims need to tackle. It's not a job for non-Muslims. You can't imagine that a non-Muslim is going to work to bring back Islam in our country. So this is rather naive. People say, oh, let's invite America, let's invite NATO, let's invite Britain, let's invite them. They'll come and save us. Oh yeah, well they saved us before. They came and they bombed us and they subjugated us and they closed our mosques and they did this and they did that. It's not going to happen. So it's actually a job of Muslims to do. So it's just another one of those aspects in life, and in fact this is one of the key challenges, is because Islam does not just say just have faith, and take it as a personal thing. I mean the West, they'd be very happy if Muslims were like that. If Islam was like Christianity, you just keep it to the confines of the mosque, and you go to the mosque on a Friday and then that's it, they'd be delighted. But Islam is much more than that. It does deal with these economic, political, social matters, which again, if you look at them in the world, they are in disarray. They are in disarray. There are people meeting in Davos at the moment. They're talking about crisis of capitalism. This is the big subject. You know, they don't know how to deal with it. Europe is about to fall apart. You know, the economy is shot. America, the biggest superpower, is the biggest indebted nation ever in history. $16 trillion. I mean, it's mind-boggling. You know, so it's not working. Now, you know, alhamdulillah, we have a system that does work, which is Islam, but unfortunately it's not there at the moment, so that's on our shoulders. We are the ones that need to carry it. We are the ones that can implement it. Sallallahu alaihi Muhammad. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Inshallah, brothers, we'll end the circle here. Inshallah, next week, inshallah, we'll resume at 7 o'clock. Inshallah.
ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا واسرافنا في امرنا وثبت اقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى سيدنا محمد كما صليت ابراهيم وعلى ابراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى محمد انك حميد مجيد. المسلم والمسلم الاحياء منهم والاموات وذكرنا الطيب وقارنا وضاعت وذكرنا نعم. اعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر ان الانسان لفي خسر الا الذين امنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.